And this is a real story. A man named Louis Agassiz, who was a naturalist, and he taught, I thought I had his bio information here, but I don't. He taught ichthyology, I think that's how you say it, the study of fishes. So we're going to look at an example of how he unlocked the love of learning for his students. This is an upper level example, but we can all learn from the principles that are here. So I'm not giving this to you as a model of what you should do, because you really shouldn't do this. I'm giving it to you as a model of how what he did achieved the purpose that you want to achieve. You can't do it the way he did it because he was at the university level. But I want you to watch for, as I read you this, watch for the ways that the student ended up saying, this is the most valuable experience I ever had in my life. So, do you think that's worth listening to? Okay. It was more than 15 years ago that I entered the laboratory of Professor Agassiz and told him I had enrolled my name in the scientific school as a student of natural history. He asked me a few questions about my object in coming, my antecedents generally, and the mode in which I afterwards proposed to use the knowledge I might acquire, and finally whether I wished to study any special branch. To the latter I replied that while I wished to be well-grounded in all departments of zoology, I proposed to devote myself especially to insects. When do you wish to begin, he asked. Now, I replied. This seemed to please him, and with an energetic, very well, he reached from a shelf a huge jar of specimens in yellow alcohol. Take this fish, he said, and look at it. We call it a hymulin. By and by, I will ask you what you have seen. With that, he left me, but in a moment returned with explicit instructions as to the care of the object entrusted to me. No man is fit to be a naturalist, said he, who does not know how to take care of specimens. I was to keep the fish before me in a tin tray and occasionally moisten the surface with alcohol from the jar, always taking care to replace the stopper tightly. Those were not the days of ground glass stoppers and elegantly shaped exhibition jars. All the old students will recall the huge necklace glass bottles with their leaky wax-besmeared corks half-eaten by insects and begrimed with cellar dust. Entomology was a cleaner science, study of insects, than ichthyology. But the example of the professor who had unhesitatingly plunged to the bottom of the jar to produce the fish was infectious. And though this alcohol had a very ancient and fish-like smell, I really dared not show any aversion within these sacred precincts and treated the alcohol as though it were pure water. Still, I was conscious of a passing feeling of disappointment, for gazing at a fish did not commend itself to an ardent entomologist. My friends at home, too, were annoyed when they discovered that no amount of eau de cologne would drown the perfume that haunted me like a shadow. In 10 minutes, I had seen all that could be seen in that fish and started in search of the professor, who had, however, left the museum. And when I returned after lingering over some of the odd animals stored in the upper apartment, my specimen was dry all over. I dashed the fluid over the fish as if to resuscitate it from a fainting fit and looked with anxiety for a return of a normal sloppy appearance. This little excitement over, nothing was to be done but return to a steadfast gaze at my mute companion. Half an hour passed. An hour. Another hour. The fish began to look loathsome. I turned it over and around. I looked it in the face. Ghastly. From behind, beneath, above, sideways, at a three-quarters view, just as ghastly. I was in despair. At an early hour, I concluded that lunch was necessary. So with infinite relief, the fish was carefully replaced in the jar, and for an hour I was free. On my return, I learned that Professor Agassi had been at the museum but had gone and would not return for several hours. Slowly, I drew forth the hideous fish, and with a feeling of desperation again looked at it. I might not use a magnifying glass. Instruments of all kinds were interdicted. My 2 hands, my 2 eyes, and the fish. It seemed a most limited field. I pushed my fingers down its throat to see how sharp its teeth were. I began to count the scales in the different rows until I was convinced that that was nonsense. At last, a happy thought struck me. I would draw the fish. And now, with surprise, I began to discover new features in the creature. Just then, the professor returned. "That is right," said he. "A pencil is one of the best eyes. I am glad to notice, too, that you keep your specimen wet and your bottle corked." With these encouraging words, he added, "Well, what is it like?" He listened attentively to my brief rehearsal of the structure of parts whose names were still unknown to me, the fringed gill arches and movable operculum, the pores of the head, fleshly lips, lidless eyes, the lateral line, the spinous fin and forked tail, the compressed and arched body. When I had finished, he waited as if expecting more, and then, with an air of disappointment, "You have not looked very carefully. Why," he continued more earnestly, "you haven't seen one of the most conspicuous features of the animal, which is as plainly before your eyes as the fish itself. Look again, look again." And he left me to my misery. I was piqued. I was mortified. Still more of that wretched fish. But now I set myself to the task with a will and discovered one thing after another until I saw how just the professor's criticism had been. The afternoon passed quickly, and when towards its close the professor inquired, "Do you see it yet?" "No," I replied, "I am certain I do not. But I see how little I saw before." "That is next best," said he earnestly. "But I won't hear you now. Put away your fish and go home. Perhaps you will be ready with a better answer in the morning. I will examine you before you look at your fish." This was disconcerting. Not only must I think of my fish all night, studying without the object before me what this unknown but most visible feature might be, but also without reviewing my new discoveries, I must give an exact account of them the next day. I had a bad memory, so I walked home by Charles River in a distracted state with my 2 perplexities. The cordial greeting from the professor the next morning was reassuring. Here was a man who seemed to be quite as anxious as I that I should see for myself what he saw. "Do you perhaps mean," I asked, "that the fish has symmetrical sides and paired organs?" His thoroughly pleased, "Of course, repaid the wakeful hours of the previous night. After he had discoursed most happily and enthusiastically, as he always did, upon the importance of this point, I ventured to ask what I should do next. "Oh, look at your fish," he said, and left me again to my own devices. In a little more than an hour, he returned and heard my new catalog. That is good," he repeated, "but that is not all. Go on." And so, for 3 long days, he placed that fish before my eyes, forbidding me to look at anything else or to use any artificial aid. "Look, look, look," was his repeated injunction. This was the best entomological, not ichthyological, entomological lesson I ever had. A lesson whose influence was extended to the details of every subsequent study. A legacy the professor has left to me, as he left to many others, of inestimable value, which we could not buy and which we cannot part, with which we cannot part. The 4th day, a second fish of the same group was placed beside the first, and I was bidden to point out the resemblances and differences between the 2. Another and another followed until the entire family lay before me, and a whole legion of jars covered the table and surrounding shelves. The odor had become a pleasant perfume. And even now, the sight of an old 6-inch worm-eaten cork brings fragrant memories. The whole group of Hymulans was thus brought into review, and whether engaged upon the dissection of the internal organs, preparation, examination of the bony framework, or the description of the various parts, Agassiz's training in the method of observing facts in their orderly arrangement was ever accompanied by the urgent exhortation not to be content with them. Facts are stupid things, he would say, until brought into connection with some general law. Facts are stupid things, he would say, until brought into connection with some general law or principle. At the end of 8 months, it was almost with reluctance that I left these friends and turned to insects. But what I gained by this outside experience has been of greater value than years of later investigation in my favorite groups. What do you observe caused the student to say that this experience was of greater value than anything else in his preparation? What? He taught himself. Very good. What was necessary for him to do that? He learned how to look. He learned how to observe. He learned how to record. Yeah, teacher stepped back, right? Gave him guidelines, very clear guidelines. Take care of this fish. Keep it wet. Keep your bottle stopped. You know, yeah, on one level, he gave his consent on one level because of the relationship, because this man was a famous teacher, an expert. He wanted to learn from him. So he gave his consent on that level. He did not give his consent to the fish. But that came, right? Somebody else. Time. Yes. He was given the gift of time. He was allowed for those days to study, to observe, to record, to think. Professor was there to encourage him, to guide, but he was given the time to self-teach. And I urge you, I know you have curriculum goals to meet. I know you have a schedule. I know you have compartments that you teach in. All those things are very difficult to overcome for real learning. But it is possible. It is possible. And what you must do is make sure that in any lesson that you plan, you are giving ample time for the student to respond to what you're giving them. What we want to do is cram it in that hour. You got an hour, you got 50 minutes, you got to cram it in so you can get to the end of the curriculum. This is futility. There are a few students who have perfect memories and who will take in the facts. But if you want real learning, you have to provide time in your lessons for the student to respond, to handle the information, to take it through his own mind to the point that he can give it back. That is the key. Okay, that took a little time, but I think that is a great story. It's just an important thing to consider. Now, I'm going to give you some opinion, which you can take with a grain of salt. But if I were running the world, this is what I would say about the principles of authentic Christian schooling. First of all, the individual child is the starting and ending point of the mission, the individual child. Yes, we have classes, but we have to make sure every child learns. The school's mission success is measured by the school's ability to bring each child to the fullest expression of his value in Christ. That's how we measure our success. There are no cookie-cutter pathways to success. Every child is unique. Every family has unique circumstances. Individualization is the basis of education for leadership. Now having said that, the relationship, a dynamic relationship between the teacher and the parent, has to be formed by continual dialogue, sharing understanding of the student's progress. This is a key factor. You as a school serve parents. I always felt at Stonebridge, I am serving the parent. I am teaching the children, but the parent has the responsibility for the education of that child. And that continual dialogue is so necessary for success. Teachers, you listen to these parents. They live with the children. Sometimes we think we're the experts. We know better, but we don't know better. Every single child that comes into your classroom is a whole university education to you. You're starting all over again with every child. So the school serves the family by intentional and consistent communication to gauge progress and address changing circumstances. And the third thing I would say is that the mission is dependent on each individual teacher's competence and character. A teacher is the living textbook, is entrusted with an influence that is certain and lasting and eternal. And so that's why your school gives you opportunities like this to sit and think and learn and be instructed and inspired and equipped, because you are the key to the school's success. You are the one who is there for the child, and you're the heart of the school. Okay, let's now go down to some more practical things and talk about how to cultivate the love of learning, how to cultivate it, and how to kill it. Would you like to hear both sides of the coin? Okay. First of all, and here again, this is my opinion, and you may not agree with everything, but my opinion is first that the teacher loves learning. This is the first and most important key. You must love learning. If you look at it as a drudgery, if you look at that textbook as just dull, if you look at your lesson planning as just something I got to get done and get down on paper and get turned in and approved or whatever, you must really love learning and generate excitement from a true love of the subject, because you've lived in the subject. You've internalized it. You met God there because you did the biblical foundations of the subject. The teacher respects the disciplines of the subject, the skills, the practice, the routines, like Professor Agassi. Second, the teacher loves the learner. You love learning, you love your subject, you love God, you love the learner. And you know him, you hear him, you take cues from the learner. Else, how are you going to know where he is and what he needs? The teacher never presumes, is always expectant of good, is surprised and delighted, never labels, never surrenders faith, and edifies genuinely, because your children know when it's genuine and when it's fakey. Learning is personalized to the learner. Methods allow the learner to internalize and express the subject with the security of known expectations and with the ability to meet them. Reasonable expectations. The content is important. It's elevated. It's classics. It's real science. It's poetry, Shakespeare, history, geography, Bible, biographies, government, economics, classic and modern languages. Purposeful learning. And we give our students a purpose for learning these things. Here's how you will use this. Here's what this understanding will do for you. Here's how you will be equipped for life through this. Here's how your life will be made more enjoyable, more full, more complete by learning these things. Purposeful learning. We just learned from Professor Agassi, the spirit of inquiry is fanned into flame by the teacher's skill to call forth involuntary attention. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Just tuck that away. The student is the producer of learning, works at his learning threshold where he can produce, not way beyond where he is able to produce, but where he can produce. If you don't put his foot on the threshold, he's never going to be able to take the first step. So we have to keep him and our expectations at his learning threshold, not at the class norm. Learning must be genuine and authentic. Standards and expectations are doable for each individual child. And number 8, learning is whole. It's not confined to a compartmentalized curriculum or a pace that prevents freedom to explore, to expand, incorporate the arts, debate, current events, theater, reading, special days of celebration. And then finally, learning is celebrated. Now, arrest the killers. It's my exhortation to you. Arrest those killers. And here they are, some of them. Meaningless or purposeless busy work, especially homework. Only give homework that is essential and important, and that your students know is important. Meaningless or purposeless busy work. They know you're just keeping them busy. They know that. They know it doesn't really have a whole lot of impact because they're the learners. Second thing, that kills learning is a feeling of namelessness. When your children don't hear their name called, they aren't greeted by using their name, they aren't acknowledged, they aren't affirmed in who they are. The sense of, I don't count, I'm just nameless here. That is an undercurrent you do not want to have in your classroom. So make it your habit to look everyone in the face every day, say their name. Make sure that you call on everyone. Make sure that your students know who you are, know how you learn. You slip over and say, I know this might be hard for you, so I want you to do it this way. Or, I know you enjoy this, and so I'm going to slip this little idea to you. Let them know that their identity is important. A grade-hyped environment, and I think this is one of the worst killers of all, when grades are so important and grades are so constant and grades are so primary and so up there, that it's a hyped sense of grading, worrying about grades, working for grades. I have a lot to say about grades that I would never say without Grant's permission. But I just want you to know that this is a minefield. And we as teachers need to be so wise about the use of grades. And make sure that we do not have in our classrooms a grade-hyped environment. Ask yourself, does this need to be graded? Sometimes we think we have to have so many grades on the grade book or we haven't finished the quarter. Does this assignment really need a grade? What is the goal here? The goal is not to get a grade in the grade book. The goal is to see that the child is learning. More than that, the child is expressing his learning, that he is able to give it back, that he has an opportunity to present and discuss and to handle the information. That is the most important thing, because that is the record step. That's the final step of learning. When the child can give it back to you in a whole way, then you know that he has internalized it. And so grades fight that kind of emphasis in the classroom. Legalism, the letter kills. When we're legalistic, at the expense of being merciful and graceful, then we are killing learning. Confusion kills learning. Confusion. If there's confusion in the classroom, my little 4th grade granddaughter had a wonderful teacher who loved the children, loved the children. She just oozed love, oozed it. So parents loved her because they loved her child. However, she was very unorganized. Now, for many children in the classroom at 4th grade, they stepped up and they just exhibited extra special organization skills because the teacher was less organized. But for my little granddaughter, she was completely mystified by what was going on every day in 4th grade. And she just worried about the teacher because she was always confused and lost. 4th grade was pretty much a bust for our little Sophie. But then she had a 5th grade teacher that made up for it. So the other lesson is we can't be everything to everybody. We have to depend on them to get certain things down the line. But she knew she was loved, and that counted for a lot. Confusion. Another thing that kills learning is rushing. We have to get through this before lunch. We have to get this done. We have to have this test Friday because next week we have to start something else. Rush, rush, rush. Push, push, push. And because of the schedules we keep very often, we fall into that. Rushing. It makes children feel, I just need to give a superficial response here. I can't really let myself fully learn. Consumerism. And by this I mean when the teacher does all the work and learning is just consumed by the learner. Teacher does all the work and all the thinking. You want a classroom that exhibits a spirit of productivity, not consumerism. The students are producing. When I go in the classrooms at Stonebridge to observe a teacher, and I tell the teachers this, what I am doing is not really observing them. I'm observing their students. Because I want to see, when I go in the classroom, everyone engaged. I want to see every student exhibiting some kind of productive learning, or it's not happening. Staleness, doing the very same thing every day. Now, there's a great advantage for the love of learning when we have routines and children know what to expect and we set these guidelines and they feel secure and safe with that. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about staleness. Well, it's Wednesday. I guess we're on page 27. A static environment, same thing. Another thing, perfectionism. Perfectionism, which unfortunately seems to be a favorite quality in the teaching profession for one reason or another. Perfectionism. Some of us really like things perfect. Well, there we are again, exhibiting expectations against our own standards. So get rid of that. And then the idea of class norms. What a 4th grader ought to be doing in the 7th month of 4th grade. Class norms very often blind us to real learning because we have children who can excel what we would think would be a norm at that point in their education. And then we have many children who aren't there yet. Not that they can't do it, they're just not there yet. And so I always like to quote Exodus. There's a wonderful verse in Exodus, and in one of the Bible translations, and I don't even remember which one, when Moses was saved from the waters by Pharaoh's daughter, when he was put in the waters, the Bible says that they did it because they knew he was no ordinary child. And so in order to save his life from the wrath of the Pharaoh, they released him on the waters, knowing that Pharaoh's daughter would save his life. They knew he was no ordinary child. What wisdom! Because there are no ordinary children. There are none. There are none. And that norm is total fiction. It's total fiction. So let me ask you, in your opinion, what is essential for cultivating a love of learning in your students? What is essential for you? Now, I don't want you to buzz about this, even though it's what it says on the slide. So I want you to think and make a note or two. I'm going to give you about a minute. In your opinion, what is essential for cultivating a love of learning in your students? I want to ask you to share, because I want this just to be something personally for you, but I think it's something to continue to think about, especially when you meet a new class at the beginning of the year, because every class is different. Every class is different. So tuck that away and pull it out in September. Okay, we're going to switch gears here. I had planned to be at this point at the end of the last session, but I'm ready now to move on to a new topic. And this topic I believe to be, I call it the back door to the love of learning. So this also is me personally, and some of you guys that teach government or statistics or something like that, you're going to argue with me, but that's okay. You can do that. We all have our opinions. But what I believe very strongly is that every teacher is an English teacher. Every teacher. Whatever you are teaching. Every teacher is an English teacher. Now, why is this important? Whether you agree with me or not, why do you think I think it's important? Okay.
Because our language reveals us.
Yes?
And so if we are all English teachers, then that gives us a baseline of sometimes where the students are coming from when they express and where we can go with that.
Okay. Where? Oh, sorry, yes. That's true too. There are many different languages. But every subject you teach, every subject here in this state, in this school, is dependent upon the English language totally for its delivery. Okay? Every language is the baseline. And I believe that it's extremely important because of what Psalm 8 says. And this was just electrifying to me when I was looking at this psalm and realized that it says, out of the mouth of babes and infants, thou hast ordained strength. Out of the mouths of babes, or what comes out of the mouths of, not babes, but of children. We know what comes out of the mouths of babes. Out of the mouths of babes and infants comes language, right? Thou hast ordained strength or strong language skills, communication skills. Why? Because of thine enemies, that thou might still the enemy and the avenger. That is powerful. You know, language is the vehicle of the gospel. So for no other reason, we should all want to be masters of language, and no one more than teachers. Out of the mouth of babes and infants thou hast ordained strength because of thine enemies, that thou mightst avenge, or still the enemy and the avenger. So here's the fact. The student's mastery of any subject depends substantially on his ability to comprehend and use the English language in any subject. Therefore, every teacher has a first obligation to ensure that the student comprehends the currency of instruction, the vocabulary, which is what you were saying. Every subject has a vocabulary, so it's essential. And I believe that the love of learning very often is squelched when our students don't know what we're talking about. They don't know the words. They don't know the vocabulary. They are not well equipped with language, or we are not well equipped with communication skills. So communication is a key thing. In every subject, the English language is the vehicle of teaching and learning. Therefore, success is impaired or compromised, enhanced or empowered by the teacher's language skills. Now, I should stop here and give you a little grammar quiz so you can measure your language skills. I know you all are perfect, so I won't worry about that, but we really do need to examine ourselves and our use of language, because James says, not many of you should become teachers, my brothers, for you know that we who teach will be judged with greater strictness. So we need to be concerned about our language skills. We need to be concerned about our communication skills and be constantly improving them, because it is a key factor in the classroom. Now let's look at the definition of language. This definition is really quite amazing, because it's so much more than we think it is when we think about language. The word language comes from the French word langue, which it means tongue. Human speech, the expression of ideas by words or significant articulate sounds for the communication of thoughts. Language consists in the oral utterance of sounds, which usage has made representative of ideas. So all the wonderful things that you know, that you want your students to know, all those wonderful things, the transference is completely dependent on your ability to make your words and your language represent accurately those ideas. That's really quite an amazing thought, isn't it? So here's what language is. When two or more persons customarily annex the same sounds to the same ideas, the expression of these sounds by one person communicates his ideas to another. This is the primary sense of language, the use of which is to communicate the thoughts of one person to another through the organs of hearing. So we have the tongue and the ear involved. Now, I'm going to suggest some resources. I have no idea where you all fall when it comes to your language use. Everyone I've spoken to here was articulate and well communicated, but I'm going to suggest some references for you if you feel a need to improve your language skills or to just polish up. First, Mr. Webster. You know, there's a complete English grammar in the front of the 1828 dictionary. It's a simple grammar. It is well constructed. It is easy to use. It's in the front of that 1828 facsimile. The Face publication Classic Grammar teaches English through literature and poetry, which is a wonderful, which I think is the best and only way to teach English, because it makes the teaching of grammar and composition relevant to the moment. You are teaching the literature, you're handling it, you're using it as you're learning the grammar and the literature. But that publication has a couple of things that I think are helpful to teachers of any subject. First, a parsing guide, which gives you the whole understanding of syntax, how sentences work together. And then it has a sentence analysis tool, a real simple little way of analyzing sentences to teach grammar. It also has a word analysis technique that you can use in any of your subjects at any level for the vocabulary of the subject. Analyze words according to their suffixes, prefixes, and root. And by doing so, you are expanding their vocabulary. They're not just memorizing a word and its definition. They're learning the parts of the word which multiplies vocabulary exponentially. So that little tool is useful in every subject. If you're interested in building your own vocabulary, there's a great little website called Wordsmith. It's free. You subscribe, they send you words every day. It's kind of fun for an elementary teacher because some of the words are really fun words and different words. There's a book called The Gramophobe's Guide to Better English in Plain English. It's called Woe Is I by Patricia O'Connor, which is a great little grammar book for people who don't teach English in the classroom, but they really need to get back to some grammar. The classic, which is what we use in our curriculum, Strunk and White, The Elements of Style, is the classic composition textbook, the only one you will ever need, and the best. There's a book by Lucian Strick called The Gift of Poetry, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute, about the use of poetry, which is a wonderful book, so I put that on the list. There's another great book called Eats, Shoots, and Leaves, The Zero Tolerance Approach to Punctuation, which is a funny book, but it also teaches you a lot about language. And then, of course, the Noah Plan English Language Curriculum Guide, because it gives you the history of the English language and of Latin and of French. But it also gives you, in that Foundations chapter, a sense of how precious and wonderful the English language is. It's unique among languages. It is the language that was used to take the gospel to the world and many other things. So loving language, I believe, is the back door to loving learning. Language play in any subject is a delight. And the use of language is delightful to children when it's funny or rhyming or sounds neat or whatever. Children love language play. And so I believe that loving language is a key to loving learning. Now, let's talk about English for a minute, because it is a special language. And we need to appreciate what our language is that God's given us. It is unique among languages, and I'm saying that to you as a French major. I love French, but I have learned that of the 7,000 languages in the world, English is second only in use to Mandarin, and it's neck and neck with Spanish, which I think is going to overtake it, but it is one of the most used, practiced languages in the world. It has been providentially prepared to carry ideals of liberty because of its history. You look at the history of the English language, it's quite amazing. It's the only language ever that did not yield itself to the conqueror. Anytime one country's been conquered by another, that country took on the language of the conqueror. That did not happen in England in the 10th and the 11th century when the Normans invaded and conquered England, and French became the language of the courts, of the marketplace, but within 300 years, English again was dominant. That's a remarkable miracle of history. It's a very simple language to learn. It has a simple grammar, extremely simple, no inflection. It has a vast and varied vocabulary that comes from all languages. And as we said, it's been used to take the gospel to the world. Our language is so rich with dialect and color and idiom and rhythm. It's delightful. And we want our children to get that sense that English is a delightful language, that language is a delight. Then they want to learn it. You see where I'm going here. Can you kill the love of language by requiring excellence? Teachers ask me, should correct spelling, vocabulary, syntax be required in every subject of the curriculum? What do you think? Should you, history teachers, require correct spelling? You science teachers? Do you have a policy here about that? Nope. What do you think? Can it kill the love of learning when we ask them to be exact? Yes, ma'am. Or yes, sir. Can't see that far.
That's all right. I'm a PE teacher, and I have multiple students when we will write something and say, do we have to spell it correctly? Mm-hmm. And it's so frustrating because I think, why do we not expect that of them, you know? Or I think it's my fifth graders that they have to write everything in cursive in class, but they don't want to do it if they have to write anything for me.
Sure.
And I just, and I always say, well, yes. And then sometimes hardly read, and I knew his teacher wouldn't accept it, his core teacher.
Right.
And I said, well, is this your best work? And he kind of sheepishly looked at me and said, well, no. And I said, okay, we'll bring it back when it is. You know.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Right. Right. Mm-hmm.
But it's so much more than that. So I think, yes, when you prepare your final report, whatever it is to be presented,
Yes.
then it needs to be as best as we can make it. But before that,
Mm-hmm.
I think focusing too much on sign grammar really can.
Now, I agree with you there. And when we teach composition, that's what we say. When you are drafting, you don't worry about the details, because what you're doing is you're pulling out of yourself the expression of an idea. And if you're focused on spelling, then you're going to get writer's block. But the final draft should be correct. Well, here's the key. Students love what they have mastered. They love it. You love what you do well, don't you? You love the things you've done to do well. You've learned to do well. You love to do them. So we love what we master. So we should require correct spelling on all assignments. We should require that the spelling be corrected. We should require correct punctuation. Look at this sentence and tell me what's wrong. Leonora walked on her head a little higher. What's wrong here? What does it need? What does it need? Where? On. Comma can make all the difference in the world. Leonora walked on her head a little higher. See how important these little marks are? Very, very important. So I would say require correct spelling on all assignments, punctuation, require precision in using words, require word studies of keywords in the subject, introduce and use challenging vocabulary continually. Have I gone over my time here? Yeah. We're going to stop. And here's the important thing. Require complete sentences in your assignments, causing the student to express correctly his thoughts with propriety when he speaks or when he writes. Okay. We're going to take a 15-minute break, I think. And then we will talk about some poetry.